All right, these are our next set of notes in Unit 1. This is midpoint and endpoint notes. You should have your sheet and you should be following along with me. All right. So we're going to start out. Our first term is congruent segments. And we're going to use examples out here to kind of show you what they're talking about with congruent segments as we go along as well. So it says if AB is equal to CD, then the segments are congruent. And so they're showing you out here on these two number lines. This segment, A to B, goes from -1 to 3. Now if you count those spaces, that's 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. This other one, CD, goes from -5 to 1. -1, excuse me. That's 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces. So these two segments are congruent even though they're in different spots on the number line. They're both 4 spaces. So the statement says if AB is congruent to CD, then the segments are congruent. We would show this, or we would write this as AB is congruent to CD. Congruent sign will be an equal sign with the little squiggly line on top of it. I should call that a little similarity line if it's just by itself. Alright. Next part. Segment addition postulate. So this is going to be our first postulate of the year. A postulate is just a statement that can be proven to be fact. You're going to kind of hear me say postulate and theorem a lot this year. But they're both pretty similar to each other. It's based on when we use them. But like I said, it's something that you could prove to be fact. And in this case, a segment addition postulate says if A, B, and C are collinear, there goes our word again, points, and B is between A and C, then if that's the case, if this is the scenario over here that you got a segment AC with a point B in between, then the segment addition postulate says AB plus BC equals AC. That's our segment addition postulate. It's pretty simple to understand too. All it's saying is the segment from A to B plus the segment from B to C would equal the whole thing AC. So it's basically a part plus a part equals the whole segment. If you can understand that postulate or that, you should be able to solve and write equations based off of that. Now, for example, let me do a simple equation with you first before we get down into our notes down here. On this, say if I call segment A to B, say if I say that length is X. Say if I say that's X. And then I tell you from B to C is 8. And then I tell you, well, guess what? The whole segment itself, the full thing from A all the way to C, is 12. Then I will ask you, what's the value of X? Well, most of y'all with this one is very simple. You will say, oh, well, you got 8 over here, the whole thing is 12, this has to be 4. But what we're trying to get y'all to do is understand the postulate to the point where you can write an equation. So it says AB, which is here, plus BC, which is here, equals AC. So based on that, knowing that, I can write an equation. My equation could say X plus 8 equals 12. And then I could solve for X. Now the reason I'm showing it to you like that is because I want you to get used to writing equations based off of just having numbers set up like this and being able to write an equation. Also, you should recognize too that we're getting into equations. This is why that first week of school are hammered so much. Y'all need to know how to do 1, 2-step and multi-step equations, because here it is, we're in the second week now and we're right into it. So that's why it was important for me to make sure y'all knew how to do 1, 2-step and multi-step equations. That's why we did the review. So now that you're here and we've tested on it, now you're in it. So here we go. Number 1, it says if EG equals 71, find the value of X. So what I usually tell all my students, and one thing I want you guys to start doing too, if your stuff is not drawn out, first draw it out. This one's drawn out for us, so I don't have to draw the segment out. But if your segment wasn't drawn out and they just gave you information, I would want you to draw your own segment out and label it yourself. This one's drawn out, so we don't have to worry about it. But the only thing that isn't labeled is the 71 is not actually on my segment. So I'm going to put it here myself. They tell me EG equals 71. So they're telling me from E all the way over to G here is 71. I'm going to put that down here so I can see all my numbers together. So here is my part plus my part equaling the whole thing. I need to write that equation now. So I know these are my two parts. If you want, it'll help you to put a plus sign in between them. And then we're going to write our equation. And so we just saw. First equation is going to be 8x minus 17 plus 5x minus 3 equals 71. And then from there, you guys should know what we're going to do. We need to combine like terms. Here, here. All right, 8x plus 5x minus 17 minus 3 equals 71. Combine that together, gonna get 13x, and then minus 17 minus 3 is gonna be negative 20 equals 71. And then we solve. Add 20, add 20, cancels. Right now 13x equals 91. Divide by 13, divide by 13. X equals 7. So I found the value of X. It told me it's 7. Okay. That's number 1. Number 2, I want to look at this one with you too. Number 2 looks a little different. Kids usually start messing up when it looks a little different. When I say it looks a little different, this one says if TV, which is the whole thing, equals 14x minus 8. Kids will see that and they get scared because they're like, oh, it's an expression here. This is different from the first one. The first one, they only gave me a number, so let me start doing something different. No, you still do what I showed you. It's just that instead of the whole thing being a whole number, the whole thing is an expression. I'm still going to put it down here. Say TV, which is my whole thing, is 14x minus 8. Make that my TV. And then they want me to find TU. Now this is the part you got to pay attention to. They said find TU. The first one said find the value of X. So all we did on this first one was find X. On the second one, we gotta find the value of X, but then after that, we gotta do something with it. And what is that we have to do with it? I'm gonna ask somebody. Anybody know? Alright, you're correct. Hopefully you're correct. We need to plug in to 9x plus 2. that'll be us finding the length of TU, because on TU they have the expression 9x plus 2. So once we find x, we need to plug into that, and that'll give us the length of TU. So we got to go a step further on this one after we do our equation. But for me, my equation is still going to be set up the same. It's going to be this part TU plus this part UV equals my whole thing, 14x minus 8. So 9x plus 2 plus 5 equals 14x minus 8. Then from there, my like terms are already grouped together, so just combine them. 9x plus 7 equals 14x minus 8. And I told you, at this point, when I'm solving an equation, I have variables on both sides. I always choose my smaller variable to move. For me, I'm going to move my 9x. Subtract 9x. Subtract 9x. Cancels. Leaves me with just a 7 equals 5x minus 8. Then I need to add 8. Add 8. Cancels. 15 equals 5x. And then last thing to do is to divide. Divide by 5. Divide by 5. Cancels. And then we'll get 3 equals x. And you say if you don't feel comfortable with that, you can reverse it and make it x equals 3. I'm not going to box that like I did my last one, because that's not my answer. They told me to find TU. Now that I found what x is, I need to find TU. So to find TU, I'm going to plug back in, but to the right thing. I'm going to plug into this one right here, which was TU. So I'm going to say TU equals, I'm going to say 9x plus 2. And then I'm going to plug in for x. TU equals 9 times 3 plus 2. And then you do order of operations. Multiplication comes before addition, so 27. 9 times 3 is 27. Plus 2 equals 29. TU equals 29. Look at that. All the stuff we done showed y'all so far has already come into play into these two problems. PEMDAS and multi-step equations with variables on both sides. It's the first day of like doing calculations in geometry, and we're already experiencing this. This is why it's so important for us to make sure that you're securing your algebra before you start this. Alright. So that's that one. So that's segment addition postulate. Moving down further, we're going to look at midpoint. Midpoint of a segment. The midpoint of a segment is a point that divides the segment into two congruent segments. A line or a ray or a segment that intersects the segment at its midpoint is said to bisect. You're going to hear this word a lot this year too. Bisect just means cuts in half. Okay, you bisect something, you split it in half. the segment, and it's called the segment bisector. So, in the diagram to the left, and I'll show it to you in a second. In the diagram to the left, they show you that B is the midpoint of line segment AC, and line L is a segment bisector of AC. So they're showing this scenario out here to the left. And they say a line, array, or a segment that intersects another segment at its midpoint will cut it in half. And so they're showing this to you too. They'll show you midpoint on a problem. I'll show you that something's in the middle by indicating on each side these little markings here. These are side markings, but they're showing me that AB is congruent to BC. They're telling me AB is equal to BC by showing me these markings here. And if that's the case, then this point has to be in the very middle of AC then. So this is a midpoint. And you got this line coming through and splitting line AC at its midpoint, which makes this a segment bisector. Alright, this line will be a segment bisector. So, the midpoint formula, this is if I want to find the midpoint between two points. And the points are going to be in coordinate form. This is the coordinate form midpoint formula. So the formula is used to find the midpoint between 2 points, x1, x2, and y1, y2. The midpoint formula says M equals, then you have a big parentheses. On top of the parentheses, it's going to say x1 plus x2 divided by 2. And then you're going to have a comma here because your answer is going to be a coordinate. y1 plus y2 divided by 2. This is the midpoint formula. You add your x's divided by 2, add your y's divided by 2. You're basically taking an average of your x and y value. Alright, let's go on the back and do some applying. So on the back, it says find the midpoint of GH given G is 7, -5, and H is 9, -1. They want to find the midpoint on this one. The first thing I do anytime I do midpoint, and I expect all you guys to do this too, I go through and I label my coordinates. So you should know your coordinates as far as like having an x and a y value. For the midpoint formula though, you're going to need to have your x's and y's labeled. So I just go and I start with my first point and I label it. I'm going to label this x1 for my 7. My -5 here will be y1. My 9 will be x2. My -1 will be y2. Alright. I'm going to start by labeling those first. And then I'm going to write my midpoint formula in. Midpoint equals parentheses x1 plus x2 divided by 2, comma, y1 plus y2 divided by 2. Once you write it in, then you pull your points. If you have it labeled, it should be easy to do. For me, parentheses x1 is for me is going to be 7. x2 for me is going to be 9. So 7 plus 9 divided by 2. My y1 is going to be -5. My y2 is going to be -1. So it's -5 plus -1. I'll put that in a little small parentheses to separate it. Divided by 2. Okay. Next line, get 7 plus 9, which is 16. It's going to be 16 divided by 2. And then I get -5 plus -1, which is -6 divided by 2. And then this last line, I'm going to simplify that. 16 divided by 2 is 8. -6 divided by 2 is -3. This would be my midpoint between the 2 points, 7, -5, and 9, -1. Alright. So that's midpoint. The next problem to the left is a little bit easier. They're just showing you simple midpoint. On this one we could do counting, but there is a mathematical way to do this too. This one is just midpoint on a number line, which is easy. It says name the value of the midpoint of EK. So they want to know the midpoint of segment EK. First thing you want to do is put your segment on the graph. E and K. My segment is going to be from here to here. Let me just bold the line a little bit. They want to know the midpoint of that. Now on this one, I know you can easily probably just look and see what your midpoint is. But if you had to do it mathematically, even if it's simple midpoint, to find EK, this is like I said, simple midpoint. All you want to do is the absolute value of your first point, which is 2, plus your second one, 8, divided by 2. And so from there, I'll do 2 plus 8 and get 10. Absolute value always turns everything positive. The reason it doesn't really turn stuff positive, but you're supposed to turn things positive because it's asking you how far a number is from 0. You can never tell them a negative number when you do that. So 2 plus 8 is 10. 10 divided by 2, which equals 5. So my midpoint on this one will be at 5. Right here. And you said, on that one you could have just counted, but if you had to do it mathematically, that's how you would want to do it. Number 5 says if P is the midpoint of XY, then XP is 8x minus 2, and PY is 12x equals 30. Find the value of x. So this is the one I was talking about up front. They don't have any drawing for us to look at a diagram. So we're going to have to make a diagram for ourselves. Anytime they don't have one, and you need to draw it, you need to draw it yourself. So I'm going to start like this. So they said P is the midpoint of XY. So I know my segment is going to be XY. So I'm going to make a segment from X to Y, from X and my Y. Give me a second here. If you have a ruler, you can use one at home. I always have a handy dandy ruler next to me. So this is my segment XY. they said P is the midpoint, so I know P is in the middle. So I'm going to gauge the middle. You know, I may not do it the best. I'm not about to measure to get the middle. I just need to show a representation of this. So I'm going to gauge that as being my middle or close to it. And I'm going to put a P there. And since I know it's the middle, the other thing I'm going to also do, I'm going to show my markings here, showing that XP is congruent to PY. And then after that, they said XP is 8X minus 2. And then they said PY is 12X minus 30. So those are my lengths. Now, some of y'all might be asking, oh, they didn't give us the XY. On this problem, we don't need to know the whole thing XY to write an equation, because this problem, they told us P was the midpoint. So if P is the midpoint, check me out on this. That means XP is equal to PY. Hear that again. If P is the midpoint, then we're saying that XP, that length from X to P, is congruent from the length from P to Y. If that's the case, I don't need to know what XY is, because I can just say these two things, these two pieces are equal to each other. Because if that's the halfway point, they have to be. XP has to be equal to 12X. And that's my equation right there. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say 8X minus 2 equals 12X minus 30. And then from there I can solve. But you need to understand that concept. If they say midpoint, then they're telling you this is the midpoint and this segment is equal to this one. And I need you to understand there's a difference between midpoint like this and what we did at the top on the front. On the front with the segment addition, they didn't tell us these were the midpoints, so we couldn't assume. On this one, you can tell it ain't midpoint, because this UV is way smaller than TU. So on this one, I needed to know all three pieces. I need to know this part, and the whole thing. And then I set the equation to solve. Same thing on this one. I did part plus part equals the whole. But what I'm telling you about midpoint is, looking at the one we're doing on the back, we don't need to know what the whole is, because we know this part is equal to this part. Why? Because P is the midpoint. I keep saying it because I wanted to stick in y'all head. Because in the years past, I said it, and then we get to the practice, kids start getting this all wrong. And it's not really that hard. You got to be able to distinguish the difference between the two problems. You got to be able to distinguish the difference between segment addition postulate and a midpoint one, like this. So since this is the case, I'm set up and I can solve. Move my small variable 8x, cancels, bring down minus 2 equals 4x minus 30, add 30, cancels, 4x 28 divide by 4, divide by 4. 7 equals x. And like I said, you can reverse it around if you want and make it x equals 7. On this one, all they asked us for was the value of x, so we didn't have to plug back in. But you guys need to pay attention, because sometimes you will have to plug back in. They won't always ask you for the value of x. Sometimes they'll switch it up and ask you, hey, what's the length of xp, or what's the length of py? After you solve, just know that you got to plug back in. The next one is on a graph. It says John started to grow a garden in his backyard. He decided to use a coordinate grid to show where his strawberries are. So strawberries are here and here. John wants to put a sprinkler exactly halfway between the two strawberries. Here. What are the coordinates where John should put his sprinkler? Put the sprinkler. That's what that should be, y'all. Okay. So on this one, first we need to start by identifying our coordinates. The first strawberry, the one up top here, where is that at? Somebody tell me. Alright, so we're going to agree to this at 2, 6. The second strawberry, okay, so you got 5 and 1. But now they want to know where's the midpoint that they should put the sprinkler that they're trying to put in. So for this one, you want to use the midpoint formula. Before we use it, like I told you before, I always label. I'm going to label my strawberries X1, Y1, and X2, Y2. Kids used to ask me too, they were like, does it matter which one I start with? Can I do X1, Y1 here and then X2, Y2? Yes, you can. It don't matter which one you start with. It just matters that you don't mix your X's and Y's up. You should know it should be X1, Y1, X2, Y2, or vice versa. You can make this X1, Y1, X2, Y2. So then for now I'm using my midpoint formula. Midpoint formula again, parentheses X1 plus X2 divided by 2, comma, Y1 plus Y2 divided by 2. Alright. Put in my numbers. M equals X1 is 2 for me. X2 is 5 divided by 2. And then next one 6 plus 1 divided by 2. Add those together. M equals 7 over 2, comma, 7 over 2. Alright. On this one, you know you're going to get decimals. So if you get to this point and you get decimals, you could just leave it in this form right here, unless they ask you specifically for a decimal form. You could just leave it like this on this one, 7 over 2 and 7 over 2. That would be the midpoint where you would just put your sprinkler. And if we had the graph, 7 divided by 2 is like 3.5. So it's basically telling me to put a point at 3.5, 3.5. So let me show you this on the graph. So over 3.5 would be here, 1, 2, well no, over 3.5 would be over 1, 2, 3.5, and then up 3.5 would be up 1, 2, 3.5. Our sprinkler will be about right here, which looks correct. That looks like the center between those two strawberries, if we had to graph it, but we don't. Alright, last two I need to show you, and it's important that you pay attention on these on the test. And I always told my kids this last year, if you're wondering what's going to be on your test for the unit, the best thing you can do for yourself is go to your notes and I'll look at them last couple of questions. That's usually what we love to test y'all on, the last couple of questions in your notes. In each set of notes is probably what you'll see on the test. I know for sure you'll see this one on the test. Alright, so you need to pay attention. It says finding a missing endpoint. So I'm going to read the problem and I'm going to talk to you about the scenario here. It says find the coordinates of A if M is equal to -1, 2, and the midpoint of AB.
Mike, please come to the gold office. Mr. Mike, please come to the gold office.
If the midpoint of AB and B has coordinates of 3, -5. Alright. So, on this one, the best thing I told y'all can do is draw it out for yourself first. Okay? So, they said the segment is called AB, so that's what I'm going to draw first. A, B. Alright. Draw a line. I'm not making it a big segment either. I don't want it to take up all my room. I just wanted to show an example. I'm going to call it AB. And then they said M, which is -1, 2, is the midpoint of that segment. So my midpoint is at M on this one. Midpoint is M. So I know this is congruent to this. And then I'm going to label what they told me. They told me M equals -1, 2. And then they told me B has coordinates of 3, -5. Alright. So what they want me to do is find the other missing endpoint. That's why this is called finding an endpoint. So you kind of got to work in reverse on this one. The one I showed you above, we found a midpoint, and we found midpoint up here on number 3 and number 6. Down here, we have our midpoint. We have one of our endpoints. We need to find the other endpoint. So let me show you the easiest way to do this. There's multiple ways to do this, but the easiest ways we've been able to teach the kids to do this is just by understanding some simple math and being able to work your way to your midpoint. So on the side here, and I always line up left to right, and I go top to bottom to show what I'm missing. Alright, so on the side here, I got point A, which I'm trying to find, and I'm gonna write point A first. And then I have my midpoint. I'm gonna write under that M. That's what I'm looking. That's what I have. And I also have point B. All right. So I'm gonna write my points in here. B, we said, was 3, -5. M was at -1, 2. And we don't know where A is. To help us find A, we're going to use B and M. So what I'm going to do, I know from B to M is a halfway point. So if I find out how much my X and Y values change from B going to M, I can use that same change and apply it to M to get me to A. So let me show you for example. So for B, they went from, and if we're walking backwards because we're kind of walking our way towards A, so we're going from B to M. From B to M, my X value went from 3 to -1. From 3 to -1. So 3 is a positive number, I went to -1. That's a negative change for me. But how many spaces did it change negatively? Like, what's from 3 to -1, how many spaces is that? And I'm asking. Let's see if anybody knows. I think we should be in agreement that it is 4 spaces. But like I said, I'm moving in a negative direction. So I'm going from here to here, and I'm moving -4. From 3 to -1, I went -4 spaces. So I'm doing the same thing on the other side. I'm just trying to figure out how I move. On this one, going up here, I'm going to just curve my arrow around. From here to here, from -5 to 2, that's my change in Y. My change in Y ended up being from -5, I went to +2. So that's a plus, definitely, because we went from a negative number or a small number to a bigger number from -5 to 2. From -5 to 2 is a plus, and you ask yourself how many spaces. How many spaces did we move to get from -5 to +2? You should have said 7. This would be a +7. Alright? So this was my move. From B to M, my change in X was -4. From B to M, my change in Y was +7. If that's the case, I just need to apply that again now. I'm going to go from here, from M to A now, and I'm going to do that same change. On this side, I'm going to do a -4 right here, but I'm minusing 4 from the -1 now. So from -1, if I take 4 more away, where do I end up at? -5. Let me do that. So it's -1 minus 4. It's -5. On this side, 2 is where I'm at for my midpoint. I'm going to add 7 to that. Why? Because my change from B to M was 7. So I have to have the same change right here. So from M to A, I'm going to do 2 plus 7. 2 plus 7, 9. This will be my other endpoint at -5, 9. This is the easiest way to find another endpoint. Just finding your change in X and your change in Y, doing some simple math, and then applying it to the other endpoint. Now, I know seeing that one time ain't gonna get what you need. So what I'm gonna do, number 8 is similar. The question is just worded differently, but it's the same kind of setup. I'm gonna help you set up on number 8, and then I want you to do that one on your own. I want you to give me some answers. Alright. So number 8, on the coordinate grid, JL has an endpoint of L at -8, 6, has a midpoint of K at -5, 10. What is the Y coordinate of J? So this one asks you a little bit more extensively, but it's still asking the same thing. The segment is JL, the midpoint on this one is K. They give you L and they give you the midpoint of K. They want to know what the Y coordinate of J is. They still want to know J basically, but when you give the answer of J, they only want to know what the Y coordinate is. So just find the whole J. Don't worry about that right now. Just find the whole J and we'll talk about what the Y coordinate is. Just do what we did up here and we'll worry about the Y coordinate at the end. Alright. So I'm gonna do setup for you. Setup on this one is gonna be J to L, making my segment. Midpoint on this one is K. Midpoint is K. So midpoint, like I said, I always just kind of guess what my middle is. I may be off. K. Now this is congruent to this. Then from there, I'm putting what they gave me in. They told me L was -8, 6. And they told me K was at -5, 10. Alright. And they want me to find J, specifically the Y coordinate of J. So basically when we get J, when y'all get whatever the coordinate is for J, they only want to know what the Y is. So in this case, like my Y coordinate for K would be 10, my Y coordinate for L would be 6. They just really want to know what the Y coordinate of J is, just that second number basically. Find the whole thing and then just at the end just say Y equals and then whatever, you know what I'm saying? Find your whole coordinate of J first and then at the end just tell what the Y is. Other part I want to set up for you, just so you'll do it right. Like I said, you can line your letters up. J, then you got K as your midpoint, then you got L, and then in parentheses, so just moving this over, -8, 6, -5, 10, and then the rest is up to you. You give me my answer. Alright? So I'm gonna just talk to y'all about answers. So I'm gonna end the actual notes here, and for people who are live with me, we can discuss the answer for this one. If you're not live, you're gonna have to do this one on your own. It's a good practice problem to do on your own anyway. Alright, so this is the end of our notes.